For this recipe, we are going to make Oriental chicken with noodles in the slow cooker. The idea of this recipe is that it's a nice complete meal for the family and that it can take the place of getting a takeaway and be a nice tasty meal that saves the family a bit of money. You can use any meat for this. We can also make a vegan version using tofu or lentils or beans, and it'll have the same lovely flavour. For the recipe we're doing today, we're using a pack of chicken thighs, so you can use meat, you could use chicken breast for this, or you can use meat on the bone. We're using this because we went into the shops earlier and this was what was on offer. So again, just buying anything with a reduced sticker on it can be a good way of cutting costs. First thing we're going to do is chop an onion. So we need to remove this dried out outside, and then we're going to hold the onion down safely and just put a little cut in, and then we can get to the layers, and we're just taking off everything that is brown. And we'll take the other end of the onion off, which all the chefs tell me off for. Get it on a nice flat surface, and then we cut the onion in half so we've got a nice non-slippy surface that's flat. Hold our hands like this so we can secure the onion, but the knife can't cut into our skin, it'll just rest against our knuckles, and we're just going to slice down this way, cut the onion into nice little vaguely even pieces. It doesn't matter too much if the onion is completely even, because it's going to go into the slow cooker for quite a long time and all the bits are just going to break down and all the lovely flavours going to get pulled out of the onion. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to use these bagged carrots that have come chopped. These were bought because they were on offer in the supermarket, so they were cheaper than buying whole carrots, and obviously if you can get something that's already been a bit prepared, that's great. And they're close to their date, so they need using up. So these have already been peeled, they've been washed, they're already cut into battens, and just so they fit well in our recipe, all we're going to do is just lob most of these just in half. Doesn't matter if you leave them whole, they'll cook perfectly fine. So all we've done with these carrots is just make them slightly shorter. There is absolutely no need to do this if you're making a recipe at home. I'm just being a bit picky because we're making this recipe for our social media channels, so I want it to look pretty, and I think the carrots will look nicer in the recipe if they're a similar size to the other veg. But that's just me being picky, and there's no need for anybody else to worry about that. Next, we're going to add in some cabbage. This is a sweetheart cabbage. We're just using this because it's in season, so they're nice and cheap at the moment. And cabbage is a really good way to get a nice large amount of vegetable matter very cheaply. They're nice and nutritious. Anything that's leafy and green is always full of lots of vitamin A and vitamin C, and they really bulk out a recipe, and they'll take on any flavour you cook them with, which is also helpful. So to start with, we're just going to take off these outside leaves, only because you can see from the top of them they've had a bit of a bashing around by the weather. They're a little bit dry and the texture of them just won't be as nice. So we'll take that off. It's almost like taking off the wrapper, and then you can see the leaves inside are much more bright green and sprightly. There are still a couple of marks on this where it's been banged around in transport a bit. I would leave all of that on. They won't taste any different, and once they've been in the slow cooker for 7 hours, you won't see those marks at all. So we're going to use about 1/4 of a head of this cabbage because it's particularly large. So the first thing we're going to do is safely cut it in half. Given that this cabbage is going to wobble around all over the place, the safest way to cut something this shape in half is to just take the top off. So we'll hold the bottom securely and just go straight through with our knife. We'll start by chopping through the middle, again just to get this on a nice flat edge so that it doesn't wriggle around, and then all we're going to do is shred it into smaller pieces that will mix up through our recipe. So we'll cut it in half, and very similar to how we did with the onion, I would then just turn this around by 90 degrees, and just take one cut that way, and then just tip the cabbage on its side, hold the top, and take another cut sort of slightly diagonally through the middle. And all we're aiming for is to end up with pieces that are about the same size. These little bits in the middle will hang together a bit more tightly, and you can just separate those with your hands, and you end up with a nice big bundle of cabbage. So we've prepped all our veggies, and the next thing we're going to do is prep our meat. Obviously, how you need to prep your meat will depend on what you're using. If you're using chicken breast or some kind of lamb or pork or beef that is off the bone, then all you need to do is cut it into pieces that are about 2-inch cubes. We're using meat that is on the bone. We're using chicken thighs. And for these, all we're going to do is open up the packet so we can see what we're dealing with. We're going to take our chicken thighs, and this is a nice big pack that should feed a whole family. And all we're going to do is just pull the skin off these chicken thighs, and it will, for the most part, just pull away. And we're doing that because we're cooking this in a slow cooker. All of the meat is going to cook in the liquid that we're cooking. So there's no chance for this skin to get crispy, which is when chicken skin is quite nice. So the skin is likely to end up a little bit soft and a bit thick, which will not be the nicest texture. So removing the skin will reduce a bit of fat from the recipe, and will also mean that what you've got when the recipe is cooked, just the nice lean meat, and not this rather large collection of quite fatty skin, which isn't that tasty. What I'm going to do now is just very quickly wash my hands, and then I'm just going to use the knife to remove a couple of extra little pieces of fat off this chicken. Next thing we're going to do with this chicken is just remove some of the fat. Again, it's partly because it will reduce the calories in the recipe and make it a little bit leaner and a little bit healthier, and partly just because this fat is just going to be soaking in the liquid we're cooking in, so it's not going to get a chance to get crunchy. It will add a little bit of flavour, but the smaller amounts of fat that are just on the outside of the chicken will just melt away while it's cooking and help to thicken the sauce. So we'll just take off these larger pieces of fat, and again, just being a bit careful about where our fingers and thumbs are, and just turning each of these pieces over and just taking off any little lumps of fat like that we don't need. Veggies and meat all chopped and prepped. Next thing is just everything going in the slow cooker. So for this recipe, we are using 1 medium onion, about 200 grams of chopped carrots, about 1/4 of a head of any cabbage or leafy green that's in season and nice and cheap. We're going to add 1 small tin of sweet corn. There will be a little bit of liquid at the bottom of this, and we're actually just going to throw the sweet corn and all the liquid in, because there'll be a nice bit of sweet flavour to that sweet corn, and we're just adding that into the recipe. For any of the slow cooker recipes that we've done as part of this series, you could use a mix of any tinned veg and also any frozen veg, which can be a really good way of reducing food waste, because they'll keep for much longer, and if they're not sat in the fridge and they're not fresh, you reduce the risk of anything going off before you get the chance to use it. So next we're going to add all of our seasonings and flavourings. So we're going to add into this recipe 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger powder, 2 dessert spoons of soy sauce, and 2 dessert spoons of teriyaki sauce. And then we're going to add 1 stock cube, and you could either add a vegetable stock cube or a chicken stock cube, and obviously if you're using beef you could add a beef stock cube. If you use lamb for this recipe you could add a lamb stock cube. Doesn't matter, any of them are fine. So the next thing we're going to do is add water. For this recipe, we're not filling the slow cooker up with water like you do for some stews. This is going to be a little bit of a drier recipe. So we are going to add 2 full cups, nice big mugs of water, which will end up being about 400 to 450 mils of water. And then we'll just give this recipe, before we put the chicken in, a nice stir and stir around all of those spices. And then the next thing we're going to do is add all of our chicken. And the chicken, for the start of the cooking process, is just going to sit on top of the water level. Because the slow cooker cooks for 7 or 8 hours, essentially what this is going to do is steam that chicken in the flavours that are now infused in the water, and we will later in the cooking process give all of this a bit of a stir so that the chicken has a chance to sit in the sauce as it's developing. So all we're aiming to do essentially is use that chicken to create as even a layer as we can on top of the layer of veg and sauce. And the last thing to do is pop the lid on and turn the slow cooker on.
And this is our very tasty Oriental inspired chicken. If you wanted to add noodles or rice to this, what you could do is just put the raw noodles or uncooked rice into the pot about 40 minutes before you're ready to serve, and just every sort of maybe 10 to 20 minutes give it a bit of a stir, so that as the noodles or the rice start to soften, you're mixing them through the liquid and they'll absorb a lot more of the liquid, and you'll end up with something that is a bit of a drier dish with lovely tasty noodles or rice. If this dish is just served on its own as it's come out here, it should make about 5 to 6 adult portions, and with extra carbs either cooked on the side or thrown in the slow cooker, it'll make about 10 to 12 adult portions. We really hope you'll join us soon for another recipe, and follow Open Kitchen on all the socials.